Ultimately, my grandmother did get diagnosed with dementia. None of the family even picked up on it, which is very common, as you and I both know. Sometimes you can have that very superficial conversation with a loved one or stop by for a short visit. But when you start looking at, balancing checkbooks and making sure property taxes are taken care of, things like that, once you get below that, superficial, communication, and you start looking at, the more specific, minute details that are going on, that's sometimes when you pick up on things. Well, for us being, 6 plus 7 hours away, we weren't able to stop by and check in and do things like that. So what happened was, unbeknownst to anyone in the family, my grandmother had a fairly large house, and a large house at night when you're alone can be a little spooky, and you're starting to hear things and maybe think things are happening that aren't. And that wasn't too different from my grandmother. One night she woke up and she was convinced that my uncle was having a big party in the other side of the home. And she called the police because she said she couldn't get these people out of her house. The police show up and there's nothing going on. There was no one there. No one had been there. My uncle was obviously at home with his wife and family and sleeping. And the police really kind of wrote it off because, again, a very small town where, in a bigger city that may not have been kind of passed over or glossed over like it was in that situation. But then a couple weeks later, she did the same thing, but this time she was even more convinced. And so consequently, the police finally did notify my uncle and said, look, this is the second time we've made a 911 call to your mom's house. And she's convinced people are, having parties and doing this and doing that and won't leave. If she does it again, now this was the second time they let it go, but this time they did thankfully notify the family. We're gonna have to intervene, and we're gonna have to take some action that we think is best until something can be put in place to avoid this from happening. And so my uncle called my mom, who was the power of attorney over healthcare, and explained what was going on. And I was raised in a very large house and plenty of room. And so I said, you know what, I'll go get grandma. So I literally the next day drove all the way down there, helped pack her up, and she come to stay with us for several years. And the beautiful thing about that was, getting to spend all that time with her, but also it gave her some stimulation, engagement, and I would even say purpose, because now she's not waking up every day, sitting there for hours on end by herself, or staring at a television. And so we saw the effects of the decline, kind of the brakes were put on them. Now, ultimately, dementia wins in the end, no matter what. And so she ended up having to go into a rehab because it progressed rapidly. And this is over like a 3-4 year period, Andrew. So it wasn't instantly. And then she ultimately passed. And so that was my firsthand, direct, personal connection to dementia. And I saw what it could do to somebody, up close and personal. She became nonverbal. She would not make eye contact. I mean, it was very hard to watch. But at the same time, I know a lot of people want to remember someone how they were, and I can appreciate and respect that for them. But for me, I also feel like, the person is still inside there at some level. And I wasn't about to let my grandmother be in a memory care facility by herself without any familiar faces. So for months, I would go over there every day and sit with her for hours. I mean, the aides were ready to build a statue of me outside because they're like, I wish every family would do something like that. And I said, well, I'm not doing it for any other reason than what I would hope someone would do for me if I was in this situation. And it's my grandma. And she subsequently did pass, obviously. And then, life goes on.